Let's pick up on this now with Stephen Nash, who joins us in the studio from FIG Securities this morning. And the RBA Assistant Governor, Guy Debelle, has been speaking about the RBS support. What has he actually suggested how that could work?
Well, at the moment, the AOFM purchases some senior pieces of the RBS securities, and the general tone was to continue with that. The idea being that it provides a limited exposure for the government. There's no ongoing contingent liabilities for the government, and it's also easy for the government to exit when they feel it's appropriate. So I suppose they're viewing this support as a temporary measure, and that over time there will be a case to withdraw it. Yeah.
But I mean, as part of the wider debate, how does it fit in with then these calls, not from the Reserve Bank, but from the government itself, to make the whole sector more competitive? If we're talking about bringing down borrowing costs, is there one solution to this? Because, you know, it seems like we're tinkering around the edges.
Look, there's multiple things going on. The RBS market has improved over the last few years. The market itself, as it gets itself back together and starts trading again, will provide a solution to the RBS side of it, which is an important source of funding for non-bank financials. Hopefully over the next 2 or 3 years that comes about and the government can withdraw, so the market operates by itself.
Yeah, but how does the market sort of hopefully get itself back to where it might? It doesn't sound as if you believe it necessarily will. It sounds like it's a 50-50.
Well, there's various things that various issuers are using at the moment. One is to use possibly a fixed rate tranche of an RBS, and that could increase demand. There has been fairly good demand for shorter pieces of the RBS market, and the AOFM support is really well. It's basically assisting the distribution of these securities. One potential problem is the more riskier parts of these RBS trades. There may be an extension of the AOFM purchases to those pieces. It's a possibility. I'm not sure if that's on the table.
The Bank of Queensland's David Liddy suggested maybe you could incentivise superannuation funds, or even I think it was superannuation funds more broadly. Basically, they could invest in RMBSs, and then you haven't got that worry about the international exposure. You could keep it here at home, and then they could actually be incentivised to be the buyers of these securities. What do you think of that kind of idea?
That brings us back to the broad problem of asset allocation in the Australian super industry, which the OECD have shown repeatedly that we've got this equity bias. We think about a balanced portfolio being 75% equities, which is quite silly. I mean, effectively what we should have is a lot more fixed income exposure. If we had a lot more fixed income exposure, the banks could access retail funding, as the CBA are doing at the moment. So we anticipate that over time there should be more incentives for more fixed income within superannuation.
Incentives or mandated? And if it's mandated, who are you following? I mean, who does that internationally?
It's globally. We find ourselves overweight equities. I think that there's a good argument for us reducing the risk in the superannuation asset allocation, just following global trends. And the global trends are more in terms of matching liabilities, and equities basically don't do that. They don't perform that function.
So why is it that we are out of step with our international counterparts? What is it? Because you talked there about incentives before. What are the incentives that are put into other markets?
Well, I think there's a lot of problems with the tax system in terms of the decision between equities and bonds. There's a lot of incentives for equities. I think the tax system incentivises people to buy equities.
Wasn't Henry meant to be a root and branch, going back, rewriting almost the rule book again? So why? What did Henry say on that, and why didn't we take from Henry, from the Gospel according to Sir Ken?
There was some discussion about those sort of incentives, and there were some moves to incentivise people back into the bond market, and bonds were specifically mentioned for the first time, I think, ever within budget papers.
But basically too hard for the government to understand, so they didn't touch it.
As the government came back in, they reduced that incentive, and it was always very small. But I think there's got to be revisited. I think increasing fixed income exposure will be good for the banking system, reducing our reliance on offshore funding.
Yeah,
but
we know what you think about this.
Well, it's just as we were having with the previous discussions, you know, revisiting and having inquiries is what? Is that COVID just another day, another concern?
Can along the road, yeah.
Look, no, I think it's a pressing issue. I think you know the risky nature of our asset allocation. I mean, for example, if we had this, if another country had this allocation, say the UK, I mean, the current conservatism in that market would suggest that it just wouldn't. It wouldn't continue. what we'd do is we'd reduce our exposure to equities at the wrong time. Now we've got a fairly good situation at this time to become more conservative and follow global trends.
Yeah. So broadly, when Swan's talking of the banking reform, which is going to give assistance to some of these building societies and the credit unions, create a fifth pillar, it'll all bring down rates for borrowers across the country, and we'll have a more competitive system. That's the political spin on it. As an expert in the space, broadly, what are your thoughts about how all of this could actually help at all?
Well, look, I think it would be good to see extra support for the non-bank sector. I think that there is a case for more competition in the banking sector. The criticism of the major banks, I think, has probably been a bit overdone, but there is a obvious case to increase competition within the banking system. What we've seen the securitisation market decline. That's coming back slowly, but I think in the interim we need measures to just increase competition. I think it's a sensible measure.
So presumably, though, you'd be scooping up not just the banks, the building societies and the credit unions, but what, as the ABA says, the smaller little banks as well?
I think within that sector there will be consolidation, so the smaller credit unions will become bigger, and eventually you'll get the mergers occurring so that we do get a proper fifth pillar.
We could ask you as well about the US situation overnight with the ADP employment numbers. Do you think the market's setting itself up for disappointment, pinning their hopes on this number and then extending that to say probably Friday's non-farm payrolls is going to be a good print?
Look, I think over the next 2 years you're probably going to get unemployment over 7% in the US and inflation under 2% for the next 2 years. Because we've got the overhangs in the product and labour markets are so large, it's going to take a lot of good employment numbers to change that situation. So the market's, it's getting a bit optimistic.
It's not just overhang, is it? It's also about immigration. That hasn't stopped in the US, so it's thwarting really that headline number coming down. You're getting more entrants vying for fewer jobs because of more productivity. I
think the bond market will get concerned about rapid growth and rapid increases in inflation, but I think broadly it is just not going to happen because of those overhangs that are present. And the Fed has commented very often that they want to see long-term rates lower, and I think they're going to get them.
Speaking of the Fed, but shifting now into Trichet, because the European Central Bank Governor is talking tonight. This is his monthly conference. He's got a lot to do when it comes to just persuading people that, Spain, Brazil, you look at those economies, Portugal, what's he got to do tonight to really get those spreads narrowing, not widening?
There was an expectation, or there is sort of an implication from his previous comments that there may be some support from the ECB in terms of buying some of these peripheral bonds. I think that makes sense. I think the problem at the moment is that it's costing the union a lot for these peripherals to issue, and there could be an argument for some sort of emergency issuance when spreads widen, say at 400 or 500 over bonds, so that an emergency issuance could save the union quite a bit of money. But that obviously there's a lot of administrative work that's got to go into that, and you can't do that immediately. So I think strong statements by the ECB will be useful, but then again that tends to contradict the European criticism of QE2.
That's right. Weren't they the ones saying it was pathetic policy or something like that?
Well, but I think it is a different situation. They are trying to constrain contagion within the markets at the moment. I think it's obviously a valid thing to do right now, but it is a little bit inconsistent.
It's a case of having the euro in his hands tonight, you suspect, as well, because that rebound overnight could just as soon all peter away if he doesn't get it right.
Yes, there's a lot swinging on this particular speech. I think you're right,
Portugal did get away a decent bond auction overnight. Do you think that goes... And Spain, did that go in any way to ease some of the worries and for bond markets?
I think it did it with the expectation of some participation by the ECB. The ECB have got a lot to do.
And they're supporting... anticipated. So you're saying that anticipated that? Okay, so again, more riding on it tonight.
Yeah, the support from the ECB is supporting a lot of the European banks right now on life support.
And doesn't sort of imply that off that life support.
In addition, they have to. It looks like they have to support the various peripheral governments as well. So there's a lot to do.
All right.
We'll wrap it up for now, Stephen. Lots to do, lots to talk about as always, and we'll look forward to next week. I think we'll chat to you Tuesday. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks.
Stephen from